I'm Ollie. I'm the museum assistant at Global Village Museum. In attendance, we also have Sophie Wolf, who's the administrative assistant. And we also have Gail Warner, the museum's executive director, and Lisa Taylor, the outreach coordinator. And we also welcome our board member, Jean Lehman, as well as a bunch of volunteers and all of you wonderful people. So our speaker, our lovely speaker, is Margot Iwanchuk. I'm hoping that I'm saying that right. And she lives in Windsor and is a volunteer at the Girl Scouts of Colorado History Center in Loveland. She's also a GSCO delegate to the GSUSA National Convention, a lifetime member of Girl Scouts, and a volunteer with Trout Unlimited's Stream Girls, providing Girl Scouts with watershed STEM programs through the eyes of scientists, artists, and anglers. Most of all, Margot loves to share about her Aunt Daisy's remarkable family history and her unique personalities, antics, and skills. And so I'm gonna give it on over to Margot, but before I do, I just wanted to let you guys know that we will be taking questions at the end, so hold it in. And after she's done with the wonderful presentation, feel free to unmute yourselves, put your questions in the chat, or unmute yourselves and ask Margot yourself. All right, here we go, Margot.
Thank you. Thank you, Ollie. And thank you all for logging into Zoom to hear this talk. I am going to make a step right now. This is always interesting to change from, I want to go to share, my dear. Let's see. Is that, hold on one second. We did it several times before we got started. So, come on. Are you all still with me?
Yes, we are.
But are you seeing the PowerPoint or are you seeing?
Not yet. We're not seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, so I have to get to show the taskbar and then go to Zoom and share. And I'm going to go, oh, come on. Share screen. More. So, of course, it's different than what we started out with. You got it yet?
No, not quite yet. Hey, Margot, I accidentally muted you. If you want to unmute yourself.
All right, I'm unmuted.
There we go.
What you got for a picture?
So far, still you, but if you want to go share screen.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to get to the Zoom and the Zoom page. Share screen, basic. And for screen 2, I want to have.
There we go.
How about that?
You're right.
We got one that's already asleep there. Okay, wake up.
All right.
And I am also going to allow myself to disappear from time to time. So to hide the thumbnail. I don't know if it will really disappear me. But. All right, thank you, Ollie. We're all set. And I am going to start off here by saying I'm located in Colorado. And I don't expect to be able to see all of you or hear from all of you, but I know you're from all over the United States. And some of you were in Girl Scout troops. Some of you may be Girl Scout historians. And you might be a friend or part of the family, as well as members of the Global Museum. If you're comfortable with Zoom, I encourage you to find the chat box and please share where you're from and your affiliation with Girl Scouts or the museum. And maybe you're a descendant of Juliette Low and I don't even know it. Maybe you just like Girl Scout cookies and that's why you're here. But either way, I've tried to tailor this talk to really be for girls as well as adults. So if you hear me explaining some things in pretty simple details, I want to make sure I reach our whole audience. And for the last 6 months, the Girl Scouts of Colorado History Center, which is 9 volunteers, mostly Girl Scout historians, which is located in Loveland, has been under the curatorship of Joanne Bush. We've been brainstorming and then collecting from our archives, and then ultimately we created the most amazing exhibit called Girl Scouts Impact the World. And this display opened last Friday at the Global Village Museum in Fort Collins, and the whole museum is a perfect venue for such an international and historic and educational journey through the last 110 years of Girl Scouts. We are showing what Girl Scouts have done with their services and efforts in the United States as well as beyond our US borders. You who currently live nearby have until May 21st to visit this museum and our exhibit. And during this time, the History Center will be also offering troop programs and tours by Girl Scout docents. And certainly on special days like March 12th, which we all know, or most people know, is Girl Scout birthday, and it will be our 110th birthday in 2022. As the first of a series of speakers that are related to the exhibit, I am focusing on Juliette Low, who is affectionately known in the Gordon family as Aunt Daisy. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have 2 college degrees, one in mathematics and one in meteorology. I'm a mother of 3 and currently living and loving living in Colorado after most of my life in New England. I'm not a historian of Juliette Low, and I'm not a historian of Girl Scouts per se, but I am, however, registered as a Girl Scout, a lifetime member, former volunteer leader, volunteer in the town and the council level. And I'm very proud of my 40 years that I have been a part of Girl Scouts and my uniform that represents some of the things I've done in volunteer activities. But my biggest love is to share with troops and groups a little about Juliette Low's life, the early history of Girl Scouts, along with our family stories and personal artifacts. I'm going to, so you can look at the slides. I'm going to try to reduce me. I don't know, am I still on the picture or am I just talking? I think I'm hopefully just talking.
You're on Juliette's picture.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so more than 59 million American women have enjoyed Girl Scouts during their childhood, and the number keeps growing. And it all started in Savannah, Georgia, by a 51-year-old woman named Juliette Gordon Low. And then see what I have to use for slides. Oh, poop. Did I just change things? I just want, okay, there we go. Before I start, I'd like to share, before I share my history of her, I'd like to draw an image in your minds of what she was like. She was an amazing person. She was a character, which means there was nobody like her. In fact, I even looked up in the dictionary to see what it meant, and it means having the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual, and she definitely was a distinctive individual. So that really seems to fit. She was full of energy, maybe a little hyper as a child, right from her adult life, right through her adult life. Her mother's letters described her as quite a handful, not the best student, and rather stubborn. And I think if Juliette were to live today, she probably would have been diagnosed with ADD, which is called attention deficit disorder. That name sounds negative, but usually someone with ADD is extremely gifted and talented. She was incredibly creative in the arts, considered a little absent-minded, which in today's terms would probably been saying she was easily distracted. She was uninhibited, that is, not self-conscious, very impulsive, which means kind of spontaneous and passionate, and quick to attempt anything she felt like trying. When someone with ADD picks out a passion or interest, they literally can hyper-focus on that task. And I think that's what she did when she was bringing Girl Scouts to America, following through and making sure it was a total success. Girls and women back then were polishing their skills to be housewives. Juliette, almost ahead of her time, encouraged her scouts to get out, explore, become more proficient in new skills like first aid, self-defense, semaphore, survival skills, Morse code, fire building, and camping. Most of these adventures were reserved for the boys and men back then, but Juliette Low modeled her handbook after the Boy Scouts, and she made sure that the girls were able to meet the same challenges. She was very funny, loved to be around children, was always popular because of her antics, which means pranks or amusing behaviors. She loved all kinds of birds, animals, and frequently was bringing them home to nurse back to health or to adopt. And she was very deaf most of her life. I'll explain to you later how that came about. She had a great imagination. She was generous, compassionate, inclusive, and very smart. Now you got the picture? That's the picture I have of Aunt Daisy, and I hope you've got that image in your mind as well. Juliette McGill Kinsey Gordon Low was born on Halloween, October 31st, 1860 in Savannah, Georgia. She was known as Daisy to her family and friends from her first days, as her uncle saw her and exclaimed, "I bet she's going to be a Daisy," and the name stuck. The Gordons were a family of influential leaders in industry, government, and military and humanitarian organization. Her father, William Washington Gordon II, was a Confederate captain in the American Civil War, and that means he fought for the South under Robert E. Lee. And he was a brigadier general later in the Spanish-American War. Her grandfather, William Washington Gordon I, was the first from Georgia to graduate in 1815 from the U.S. Military Academy. That's better known as West Point. And it's also the Army's version of what we have out in Colorado Springs, which we call the Air Force Academy. He was elected as mayor of Savannah, then to the House of Representatives, and then to the state Georgia Senate. He founded and served as president of the Central Railroad Banking Company. And this is all her grandfather, who was very successful before her father came along. Her mother, Eleanor Kinsey Gordon, was known as Nellie, and she was the granddaughter of John Kinsey, an Indian agent in Fort Winnebago, Wisconsin, and who later played an important role in the founding of Chicago, Illinois. Their family home, it was in 1804, was considered to be the first house built there near the mouth of the Chicago River. Daisy's, this is an amazing story. Daisy's great grandmother, her name was Eleanor Little McKip Kinsey, had been captured by the Native Americans at the age of 9. Even though she was a captive, she was always joyful. So the Native Americans, these are the Indian tribes that were out there, started calling her Little Ship Under Full Sail. And she was adopted. She was the adopted daughter of the Seneca chief called Chief Corn Planter. And for years, she dwelt with the tribe. Eventually, the Senecas asked her what she would like, and she said she wanted to go back to her family, and they let her return after being kidnapped. She went back to her family. You can read more about these stories about the early Chicago days in a book called Wabam. Daisy inherited the traits and personalities of both her parents. Like her mother, she possessed a great deal of charm, guts, and wit, but also like her father's instincts for our organization and leadership. Daisy was an infant shortly before the Civil War, and her childhood was very complicated by the war efforts and her parents' conflicting views on slavery. Her father was a Georgian-born Southern slave owner and believed that the secession from the South, the secession of the South from the Union, which means that they wanted the Southern states to literally separate from the Northern states. Yet her mother believed in abolition or the ending of slavery. While Daisy's father was joining the war efforts on behalf of the South, her mother's relatives were enlisting in the Northern militias. Her mother struggled with the conflicting feelings of having loved ones on both sides of the war and often faced wrath from her neighbors. They didn't understand that the Gordon's family could have such divided feelings. As the war dragged on, Daisy's mother grew increasingly despondent about her husband's absence and her ability to provide for the family. By the time Daisy was 4, the South had lost the war, and the little girl, malnourished and sickly, still had not seen her father for a few days at a time. Her mother and sisters, under the protection of General Sherman, were moved to the north and moved to Illinois to stay with Daisy's maternal grandparents. And then by 1865, the family was reunited in Savannah, and thanks to her mother's efforts, they were able to recoup their financial losses in the South, and Daisy's father was able to revitalize the Belmont cotton plantation. The birthplace of Juliette Low is on Oglethorpe Street in Savannah, Georgia. It's called the Gordon House, and it was completed in 1821, and it's an outstanding example of Regency architecture. It was saved from demolition by the Girl Scouts and then returned to its 1866 glory. Usually I hear asked in my audience right now is, have you been to Savannah? Which I'm sure you're all raising your hands, or some of you will someday get there and be able to say that you too have been to the birthplace. It is Savannah's first national landmark. My grandmother, Eleanor Wayne Parker McPherson, who was Daisy's niece, and Anne Hyde Choate, Daisy's goddaughter, were the prime instigators in the Girl Scouts' acquisition of the Gordon Low birthplace. So my grandmother and Anne Hyde Choate together raised the money and insisted and worked very hard to make sure that the house stayed and in one piece and was purchased by the Girl Scouts, so that now you can call it the founder's birthplace and visit it. Daisy had a very happy childhood. Oops, this is the house itself. Daisy had a happy childhood. As a young girl, she enjoyed helping people. She, her sisters, and her cousins organized sewing clubs and made clothing for poor families in their town. Her siblings, however, often commented on her inability to keep track of time and her frequent experiments that went awry. Her acts of kindness that resulted in good-natured disasters. She then eventually gained the nickname of Crazy Daisy, giving her the reputation of being an eccentric, which means slightly strange and extraordinary. And that would stick with her for the rest of her life. She attended boarding school, and that means she slept overnight at the school with other girls, at the Virginia Institute, the Virginia Female Institute, and then at Edge Hill, which was run by Thomas Jefferson's granddaughters. She went to Miss Emmett's in Morristown, New Jersey, and then a French finishing school at Mademoiselle Charbonnier's in New York City. And a French finishing school is where you are taught how to curtsy, shake hands, walk properly, behave like a lady, and dress just properly as well. Following her school years, Daisy traveled extensively in the United States as well as in Europe. This picture here, Daisy is here on the lower left, and to her right is my grandmother's mother, Eleanor. And Eleanor's husband is over here, Wayne Parker. He was a judge in Newark, New Jersey. I like this photo. This is a picture of Aunt Daisy driving her horse in Savannah. And a portrait done of her. She was a beautiful lady and definitely looks like she survived and did well at finishing school. Here she is spending the summer in Wales. Here she is about 28 years old. On December 21st, 1886, she married a Britisher, that's a man from England, named William Mackay Low. He was known as Willie. He was the son of a wealthy cotton merchant, and they had families both in Savannah and in England. They dated for 4 years before they got married, and Daisy's parents did not approve of William Low. Daisy's father had always wanted his daughters to marry a man who was accustomed to hard work and not dependent on family wealth. Before Daisy was married, she suffered many ear infections. And today you girls now can take that pink bubblegum tasting stuff called amoxicillin, but back then they didn't have anything for ear infections. And she had a lot of them. And so she really had problems with hearing in one ear. And then when she got a little older, she insisted to a doctor use silver nitrate in her ear to help her with an ear infection. And they put too much in, and the powerful mixture caused her to go deaf in that ear. And then at her wedding, when she was 26, she lost the hearing in the other ear because back then they used to throw rice, uncooked rice, as good luck. And a piece lodged in her ear, and on their honeymoon, Willie took her over actually to Atlanta to get the piece of rice removed. And while she was there and the doctor was trying to take it out, he punctured her eardrum, and then she got a massive infection. So she lost the hearing in that ear as well. Nevertheless, she persevered and did not let her disability of going deaf stop her from attaining any of her goals. Willie and Daisy remained in their family's house, which is what this slide is, and then for about a year, and then they moved to England. Shortly thereafter, they bought a country estate in England called Wellesbourne. It was in Wellesbourne in Warwickshire, and that was their primary residence. Daisy adapted to the easy life of an English gentry. She was presented to the Queen at court. This means that she had to bow before the Queen of England, and that was a very big honor. She attended and hosted house parties and traveled extensively. She rode with the hounds, and that means that they would actually take the scent of a fox and pull it through the grass and over fences and through fields. And then the dogs would chase the scent, and then people on horseback would race after the dogs and jump over the fences. And that was considered a lot of fun, but it sounds pretty risky to me. But anyway, she would ride with the hounds, that's what it was called. And she would fly fish, and she summered on grouse moors, which were beautiful valleys with birds and wildlife. And she also had a townhouse in London. Although the couple had moved to England, Daisy really divided her time between being in England and Scotland, as well as traveling back to the United States, frequently back and forth. Ultimately, the marriage would not be a loving, devoted relationship like she had witnessed with her parents. Willie, having a large inheritance, spent money wildly, large amounts of time at the racetracks. These were horse races, not car races. He dabbled in raising race horses and made a full-time job of gallivanting or running around England and Scotland with wealthy and gregarious people. The Lows had no children, and as years passed, they increasingly spent time apart. There was evidence of a growing unhappiness in their marriage, and in 1902, Willie Low abandoned his wife Daisy for another woman and asked for divorce. They were in the process of this divorce when he died suddenly of a seizure in 1905. And he left the bulk of his estate to his mistress, and leaving Daisy obviously quite dejected. However, she contested the will, and luckily the courts sided with her, meaning she did get her inheritance money. And she spent the next several years globetrotting, which would mean traveling in luxury, through Europe, Egypt, and India. She even traveled up the Nile where no white woman had gone before and climbed the Great Pyramid. She then enrolled in art school in Paris to further her passion and skills in sculpture. Daisy spent several years searching for something useful to do with her life. Luckily, it ended while attending a luncheon in England in 1911. This is the year before Girl Scouts started in the United States. So in 1911, she met Lord Robert Stevenson Smythe Baden-Powell, better known as BP. And he was the founder of the British Boy Scouts. Though she became keenly interested in the scouting movement. And then during the next year, Daisy organized a troop of Girl Guides, which were the female equivalent of Boy Scouts, among poor girls on her estate in Scotland, and then founded 2 more troops in London. BP's sisters, Agnes, and then also his wife, Olave, led the Girl Scout movement in Great Britain. And then on March 12th, 1912, Daisy established the first troop of Girl Guides in the United States in her native Savannah. Though her steadfast, through her steadfast promotion, the movement grew rapidly, becoming the Girl Scouts of America in 1913. The organization was incorporated in 1915 with the national headquarters in Washington, D.C. And then by 1916, they had over 7,000 members. And shortly thereafter, they were able to pay for worker staff in the national office. By 1917, this is just 5 years later after starting in Savannah, Girl Scouts were established in Colorado Springs. That's a long distance in a very, very short time. Daisy served as president until 1920, when she was bestowed the rightful title, which means she took on the name of founder. And her goddaughter, Anne Cho, took on the role as president. This is a picture of you notice up there, Troop 1, the first troop of Girl Scouts in the United States. In developing the Girl Scout movement in the United States, Juliette brought girls from all backgrounds to the outdoors and giving them the opportunity to develop self-reliance, which is independence, and resourcefulness. She encouraged girls to prepare not only for traditional homemaking, but also for possible roles as professional women in the arts, sciences, and business. Oop, did I just change the picture again? There we go. And Girl Scouting, and they were to be active citizens outside the home. Girl Scouting welcomed girls with disabilities at that time when they were usually excluded from activities. This idea seemed quite natural to Juliette because who never let deafness, back problems, and later cancer keep her from full participation in life. I'm just going to let you look at a couple of these pictures. 15 years, for 15 years, Daisy devoted her time, energy, finances to the movement. She elicited major support and contributions from communities all over the world and was a frequent guest at campfires. Daisy truly believed that peace could come to the world through women communicating internationally. By maintaining contact with overseas Girl Scouts and Girl Guides during the World War I, she laid the foundation for the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, which we know as WAGs. Now today, it reaches 10 million girls, young women in 145 countries. And this organization provides a mechanism for young women around the world to share ideas and cultures. There are also 5 World Girl Scout centers, one Pax Lodge in London, one in India, Sangam, our chalet in Switzerland, in Mexico, our Cabana, and the latest one, Kusafiri in Africa. And if you would visit the exhibit at the Global Museum, you'll learn all about these world centers. In 1923, Daisy contracted cancer. She kept her illness secret and dauntlessly, which means bravely, continued her efforts. She was instrumental in organizing the first World Girl Scout camp in the United States in 1926. And then less than a year later, she died on January 17th, 1927. And she was 66 years old. She was buried in her uniform, which represented the organization she founded and which to this day continues to change the world. Please note there's a silver fish hanging around her neck, and this is the highest award in girl guiding, which is in Europe, in England. And it was not a badge or something you would earn, but it was given to you. And Daisy was very proud of that silver fish. Very few people in the United States received it. I believe Helen Storrow and maybe Anne Heidchow, maybe one other. Daisy was buried in her uniform with her silver fish at her request. The membership of Girl Scouts by this time numbered 168,000, but today in the United States, there are over 3.3 million members of GSUSA. 2.4 are girl members, and the rest are adult, working primarily as volunteers. Don't quote me on that number because it's always changing, but Girl Scouts continues its mission of building girls of courage, confidence, and character, and who make the world a better place. I was going to now bring my picture up again. I'm not sure talking if it has come up. There I am. Okay. Now I kind of like to switch gears a little bit and describe hopefully some stories from the family that have come down through various relatives. And it will even describe her even as a much more interesting person. Besides the fact that she was caring, generous, very funny, sometimes impulsive, and quite stubborn. She was a good linguist. That means she could speak other languages besides English. She was a fair poet. On the other hand, she could not spell well. And she was incorrigibly unpunctual, as my grandmother said, which means she was always late. Her favorite hand only had one watch. Her favorite watch only had one hand. Now, girls, if you use digital watches, it's just numbers on it. But if you use an analog watch, there's 2 hands, one for the hour and one for the minute. And her watch only had 1 hand, not 2 hands. It's said that she invited people to a large dance and forgot all about it. She was found sitting up in bed gloomily paying her bills. She thought she heard some orchestra music downstairs, but she wasn't sure because of her deafness, and she was up there sorting bills into 3 envelopes: this year, next year, and never. My mother, Daisy Low's my mother, who is Daisy's great niece, and Arthur Gordon, her nephew, remembered Daisy's favorite Pekingese called Chi Chi. And they remembered that this dog was a little, not very well furried up. It was kind of moth-eaten looking, with the back legs were actually longer than the front legs. And he just looked like he'd been put together by mistake. And it had terrible halitosis, which means bad breath. And it was nicknamed by the family Stinkpot Hairy Boy. And my grandmother also remembers, that was Daisy's niece, when she was traveling with Daisy. Daisy was in Great Britain and they visited a friend's house, and Daisy saw 2 life-size clay models of Pekingese. And Daisy was so infatuated, she insisted that the homeowner give her one of those clay modeled life-size Pekingese to remind her of her Chi Chi dog. And my grandmother ended up carrying this life-size clay modeled Pekingese all over their travels in England in her arms until they got home. Daisy was very athletic. From her childhood on, she was a good swimmer. She was captain of the rowing team as a girl and learned to canoe as an adult, and she was also an avid tennis player. One of Daisy's very special skills was standing on her head. She stood on her head every year on her birthday to prove that she could still do it. And she also celebrated her nieces and nephews' birthday by standing on her head. And one time she stood on the boardroom table on her head in the national headquarters to show off the new Girl Scout shoes that were part of the uniform. Now, girls, please realize she always wore a skirt. And so in order to be proper by standing on her head, she would tuck her skirt between her legs and stand on her head so that she was properly covered. So try it someday. Put on a long skirt and then try standing on your head. Fishing with dinner guests. Daisy's high spirits enchanted the British. Rudyard Kipling, most of us know him as an author, but you girls would maybe know him because the book he wrote, The Jungle Book, was turned into a movie called The Jungle Book, but he was the original author of it. He recalled Daisy snatching him from his port and cigars one night after dinner and made him go salmon fishing in his evening clothes. And on another moonlit night, she did a fishing expedition with all her dinner jacketed guests, and she hooked one of the guests by the ear, and he kept yelling, "Ouch," and she kept calling for the gamekeeper, thinking she caught a big fish, and she couldn't hear him yelling. Arthur, her nephew, loved Daisy to come and be the babysitter and recalled her taking him fishing in the rowboat, she would wear an enormous brimmed hat with veils to keep the Georgia sun out and the mosquitoes from getting to her. But she always insisted on bringing a hammer or a mallet so she could rap fish over the head to keep the poor fish from suffering. I'm not sure if I would want to be wrapped over the head, but either way, she was always trying to save an animal. She would tell fortunes for the nieces and nephews and entertain them by reading their palms. So she was a really cool aunt to have. Daisy's driving was also very erratic, meaning crazy. In fact, Rudyard Kipling was terrified to drive with her. Once she accidentally drove her car into the dining room of some neighbors and quickly retreated to call her brother, who was a lawyer. And he asked, "Did you inquire about making repairs?" And she answered, she didn't want to interrupt their dinner. Well, I'm sure she did, but anyway. My favorite story is that one year at Thanksgiving, the Gordons raised a turkey and they all became very fond of him and called him Old Tom. And when the day came for Old Tom to become Thanksgiving dinner, Daisy begged her papa not to kill the turkey, but if not, at least let her try some anesthesia so it wouldn't feel having his head chopped off. So she got some chloroform and she put poor Tom to sleep. They plucked all the feathers out of Tom and put him in cold storage, which is like a big walk-in icebox. They did not, however, cut his head off at this point. So the next morning when they came in to get the old Tom for cooking, he was very much alive, very, very mad, stark naked with no feathers, and was chasing the cook around the kitchen table. And that was the last time that Daisy ever was allowed to save a turkey from having its head chopped off. Because Daisy's hair was the color of soft brown taffy, she let her cousin braid some taffy into her hair. Needless to say, her mother was furious and they had to cut all her hair off because all the candy was stuck braided into her hair. My mother remembered Daisy visiting her family in New Jersey, and after dinner they would retire in the music room. And Daisy's deafness did not keep her from hearing the piano because she would bend over and place her teeth on the soundboard of the piano, which is the wooden part that the strings are attached to. And she'd listen to the vibrations through her jawbone. And this was pretty smart, but it was also very odd for my mother when she was about 5 or 6 to see this lady bent over the piano and listening with her teeth on the soundboard. Aunt Daisy had the powers of persuasion, and one time she was knitting on a trolley, and as it drove along, she dropped a ball of yarn at the door and it went rolling down behind them, but she convinced the trolley driver to back the trolley up so she could wind up her ball of yarn. I'm going to go back to some slides now that I'm going to continue talking to you in person, but if I can get our next picture this is a picture that it's a doodle. It was Daisy drawing a picture of her friend and what he would look like riding his horse when the trains were on strike. There were quite a few interesting caricatures that she would do. She was quite good at painting, and this is a still life that she did. Her favorite medium was working with clay, and this is a sculpture she did of her goddaughter. And this is what's called a bust. It's really from the neck up of her grandfather, W.W. Gordon. She loved animals. And this is Polly Poons, her favorite parrot. And Polly is there with Peggy Gordon Seiler, who is was her niece. And I don't know if Margaret is on, but she might be, and that would be Peggy's daughter. Here's Juliette Low with one of her other famous birds. I like this picture a lot. And late in life, again with Polly Poons. And it's said that Daisy slept with the parrot on her chest when she went to sleep. Now I'm going to share with you some of the things that Daisy loved art, and she took this particular tea tray and carved it herself. So she was good at both sculpture, but also working with hand tools that were wooden carving tools. Here it is up close. This tray is actually in the display at the museum right now in Fort Collins. She could also work with iron. She could work with actually bending the iron. She made these two insides of the gate with her parents' initials on either side. She had her blacksmith who made horseshoes for the horse teach her how to heat up the iron and hammer it and bend it, and created these gates, which are in Savannah. You can see them there. If you're feeling a little not so productive after hearing all that she could do, don't feel badly. It's just amazing, her abilities to work with all sorts of mediums. She even had 2 patents. She had a patent for a liquid container to hold water in a garbage can, which makes sense. We use plastic bags now, but she had a patent. She also patented the Girl Scout trefoil pin. It was a design patent that she did. This is her sled, and that's also on, you can see it at the museum. And yes, they did have snow. I think I showed you a picture of snow in Savannah, but this was her sled when she was growing up. Now, Daisy was given by her husband at their wedding a very special gift of custom-made overnight case, and what we would call a dressing table case. We today, if I were to go spend the night, I'd remember to bring maybe a toothbrush and maybe some dental floss and a comb or a brush, but she traveled with everything. And her husband, Willie, had this made for her. This is the outside of the case. Inside is a leather bound case, and that orange stuff is wax that is to go through customs. They would make sure it was shut and didn't get opened again. Inside was all sorts of silver items that she would have on her dressing table in case she needed it. This particular item right here is a sandwich box.